I still remember the way her voice cut through the silence like a blade. It was the first full dinner we had all shared since Nathan's funeral. The table was too quiet, too tense, with just the sound of cutlery clinking against porcelain. I had barely touched my food, still lost in the fog of losing my husband. Then, without warning, Barbara placed her fork down with a sharp clack, folded her napkin neatly, and said in a tone cold enough to freeze the air, "Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back." The words dropped like stones. Her son. My husband had been buried only 3 days ago. My fingers froze around the glass in my hand. I looked up slowly, trying to process what I'd just heard. Barbara leaned back in her chair, satisfied, like she had finally done what she'd always wanted to do. Her daughter Elaine, sitting 2 seats down, didn't even flinch. She just gave a half smile and sipped her wine like nothing had happened. "This house," Barbara added, her voice even colder now, "was never really yours anyway." I looked across the table where Nathan used to sit. His chair was empty. His presence had always softened. This house made it bearable. Without him, the walls felt smaller, the corners sharper, the coldness of this family unfiltered. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood up slowly and quietly and began clearing the dishes from the table. Barbara raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised I hadn't reacted. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. "Leave those," she snapped. "You're not the help anymore." I didn't respond. I took the plates into the kitchen, washed them like I had done 100 times before, dried my hands, and went upstairs to our bedroom. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the bed Nathan and I once shared and stared at the floor. "Grieve, pack your bags, and never come back." That sentence played on a loop in my head. They thought I was done. That with Nathan gone, I had no place left in this house and this family. They saw me as just the childless wife, a placeholder, now irrelevant. But they were wrong. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, I showered, got dressed, and left without a word. I didn't go to my sister's. I didn't check into a hotel. I went to a lawyer's office. And that was the day everything started to change. From the moment I married Nathan, I knew his family didn't like me. Barbara, his mother, made it known early on. She never yelled, never cursed. That would have been too easy to confront. Instead, she wielded politeness like a scalpel. "You're very independent, Claire," she said the first time I met her, her lips smiling while her eyes stayed flat. "Women who focus on careers usually don't stay married long. But let's hope you're the exception." I laughed it off then. I was 29, proud of my career in nonprofit management, and deeply in love with a man who seemed untouched by his family's coldness. But the warnings were always there. Elaine, his older sister, once pulled me aside at a family barbecue and said, "Don't expect Mom to ever treat you like a daughter. You didn't come from our world. You're not legacy." She looked me up and down like I was an intruder. Nathan always tried to make peace. He would wrap his arms around me after awkward dinners and whisper, "Just ignore them. We'll build our own family, our own life." And we did. Or at least we tried. We bought a charming old house outside of Charleston, not the Henderson family estate, but our own place. I poured myself into making it a home. Painted walls, refinished cabinets, planted a garden in the back that bloomed bright each spring. Nathan worked long hours as a financial analyst. I continued running programs for underprivileged teens. We tried for children, but after 2 miscarriages and 1 failed IVF attempt, we stopped. The grief nearly broke me. But through all of that, Barbara never softened. She never visited unless Nathan dragged her. And when she did, she made sure to remind me how quiet the house felt, without a baby's cry. "Some women just aren't meant for motherhood," she once said while sipping tea in our living room. Nothing wrong with that. Just nature. Nathan's father had passed away when he was young, so Barbara ruled the family like a CEO in pearls. She and Elaine still lived in the Henderson family mansion, the house where we had dinner that awful night, and considered it the legacy home. They never saw me as family, just the outsider Nathan married out of rebellion. When Nathan was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Barbara barely came to the hospital. Elaine visited twice, but I was there every day. I held his hand through the morphine fog. I fed him spoonfuls of broth when he couldn't hold down anything else. I read to him even when I knew he could no longer hear me. He died at 2:43 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. And Barbara didn't even cry at the funeral. She stood at the gravesite like she was attending a business luncheon, nodding politely as people passed by. So when she told me to pack my bags and never come back, I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. Because I thought, just maybe, that losing her son would crack that shell around her. That grief would make her human. It didn't. And what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Nathan had been planning something before he died. Something that would change everything. 3 weeks before Nathan passed, we sat together on the porch swing, the late summer air heavy with jasmine. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were sharp. He reached for my hand and laced our fingers together like he used to when we first dated. "Claire," he said softly, "I need to talk to you about what happens after." I squeezed his hand. "Let's not—" "No," he interrupted gently. "Please, listen." I nodded. I had stopped trying to argue with reality by then. He took a slow breath. "You know my family. They'll come for the house, the accounts. They'll say you're not entitled to anything. I'm your wife." I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I've stood by you through all of this." He smiled sadly. "And they've never accepted that. You know it." I looked away. He was right. Barbara had already asked once about what Claire plans to do after I was a temporary guest instead of his partner. Nathan reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a small leather notebook. He handed it to me. "What is this?" "My peace of mind," he said. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, account numbers, passwords, names, instructions. "I set up a trust," he said, quietly, "about 2 years ago. It owns the house and the lake cabin, and the stocks from Dad's investment portfolio. All of it is under the Claire Hale Living Trust. You are the sole beneficiary. No one else knows." I blinked at the pages, heart pounding. "Nathan, why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd argue with me," he said, chuckling weakly. "You'd say it was too much that I should share with Elaine, or put Mom as co-beneficiary. But Claire, I've watched how they treat you, and I want you to have something that is yours, completely yours, something they can't touch or take or question." I turned to him, eyes stinging. "But they'll come after it. You know they will." He nodded. "And that's why I worked with a lawyer who specializes in family asset protection. Everything is airtight. The documents are filed. The accounts are separate. If they try anything, they'll lose." Tears rolled down my cheeks, now silent and uncontrollable. "I couldn't protect you from the pain," he whispered, "but I can protect you from them." He paused, then added with a quiet smile, "And Claire, there's more. The cabin, I know you always loved it. I left a letter for you in the cedar box there. I want you to read it when you feel strong enough." I nodded, unable to speak. We sat there in silence for a while. The cicadas hummed in the trees. The swing creaked gently beneath us. It was one of the last times Nathan had the energy to sit outside. A week later, he was in hospice. 2 weeks after that, he was gone. And I was left not only with grief, but with a choice. Let them push me out of the life I helped build, or fight back with the truth Nathan had left behind. That's why the next morning, after Barbara's cruel words and my silent retreat from the table, I walked into the office of Thomas Whitaker, Nathan's lawyer, with that leather notebook in my purse and a new kind of fire in my chest. I wasn't going to argue with them. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let the law speak for me. Thomas Whitaker's office smelled like old wood-strong coffee and something faintly citrusy, the kind of place that felt steady, serious. Just stepping inside made me feel like I had a spine again. He looked up from his desk and immediately stood. "Claire," he said gently, "I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I replied, voice low but clear. "Nathan said you'd be expecting me." He nodded, motioned to the chair across from him. "Yes, he asked me to walk you through everything when the time came. I just didn't think it would be so soon." I sat down and placed the leather notebook on his desk. He gave me this. I haven't opened every page yet, but he said it would make things clear. Thomas opened the notebook and smiled faintly. Nathan was a very thorough man. He pulled a file folder from his drawer. It was thick, and stamped neatly on the cover were the words Claire Hale Living Trust. He opened it, flipped through several pages, then slid a certified copy of the trust across the desk. As of 2 years ago, all of Nathan's individually owned assets were placed into this trust. That includes your house, the lake cabin, the investment accounts, and the vintage car collection he kept in storage. I blinked. Wait, the house? He nodded. Technically, you're not inheriting the house. You already own it. The trust has been active since 2023. You are the trustee and the sole beneficiary. I felt something crack open in my chest. Relief. Know something deeper. Recognition. I had not imagined it. Nathan had prepared for this. For them. Thomas continued. He also placed a provision here in the event of any challenge from family members. This trust cannot be contested. He outlined detailed notes explaining his rationale. He handed me a letter typed, dated, signed by Nathan. It read, Barbara and Elaine have made it clear over the years that they see Claire as an outsider. I cannot control how they feel, but I can control what they can take. Claire has been my wife, my caretaker, my partner, and my only constant support. This trust is not just about money or property, it's about respect. She will have the dignity they have never granted her. I swallowed hard. Thomas let me sit with it for a moment. Then he leaned forward, serious now. There's one more thing, he said. Nathan also made me aware that Barbara might try to force you out. Verbally, emotionally, maybe even legally. That's why he left instructions for me to be on standby in case you needed support. I stared at him. What does that mean, support? He opened another envelope. This is a formal letter I will send on my firm's letterhead should anyone attempt to pressure you out of your home. It asserts your legal ownership of the property and includes a copy of the trust, the deed, and Nathan's statement. If needed, we can also file for a temporary restraining order. My throat tightened. That won't be necessary yet, but you'll have it in case. I sat back staring at the letter, the trust, the tidy folder that held everything my husband had built and everything his family now couldn't touch. They're going to hate me, I whispered. Thomas folded his hands. They already did. This just means now they can't control you. I exhaled slowly. For the first time since the funeral, I felt my footing. Not because I had power, but because they didn't. As I gathered the papers and stood to leave, I asked quietly, do you think Nathan knew how this would all unfold? Thomas gave a small smile. He didn't know the details, but he knew the people. And I realized then this wasn't just about property. It was about being seen, being respected, being untouchable. I left the law office with a manila envelope tucked tightly under my arm. It held everything, the trust documents, the proof of ownership, the letter Thomas would send if I needed it. But I didn't head home just yet. I needed time, space, quiet. I drove to the overlook Nathan and I used to visit on Sunday mornings, back when life felt a little slower. The wind off the bluff curled around me sharp and fresh. Below, the waves battered the rocks in steady rhythm. I sat on the hood of my car, the envelope beside me, and let the sea remind me I was still here. Not ruined, not banished, just waiting. By the time I returned home, the sun was low, the sky streaked with amber. I pulled into the driveway, my driveway, and saw Barbara's silver Lexus parked like a monument to entitlement. Her friend Elaine was there too, standing on the porch like she owned it. I didn't say a word as I walked past them. Barbara's voice followed me like a mosquito. Did you go look at assisted living places, Claire? I hope so. We've made a list for you. Something with activities. You'll like it. I unlocked the front door. My hands didn't shake. Inside, the living room still smelled like Nathan's cologne. I looked at his armchair, his records neatly stacked beside the stereo, and I smiled for the first time in days. They thought I was cornered. They thought wrong. That night, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Thomas, asking him to prepare the formal notice for Barbara and Elaine. The second was to Donna, my closest friend and neighbor, who had always told me, if those two ever step over the line, you call me. I'll bring pie and popcorn. The third was to Nathan's old project manager, Leslie, a woman he trusted, who had helped manage his consulting work remotely after he retired. I asked her if she could come by the next afternoon. There were business assets I needed to understand better. Apparently, a portfolio of patents and design royalties Nathan had kept under wraps. Leslie didn't sound surprised. I figured this day would come, she said. Nathan was always 5 steps ahead. The next morning, I dressed with care. A cream blouse, jeans, clean hair, a soft touch of lip balm. I wanted to look composed, not vindictive. At 10:00 a.m. sharp, I heard the front door open. Barbara, she never knocked. Well, she said loudly, stepping inside with Elaine close behind. I hope you've packed. I've scheduled the appraisal for next week. I turned slowly from the kitchen counter. Appraisal for the house, dear, Elaine chirped. Barbara wants to make sure the numbers are fair before we list it. Oh, and we'll need the guest room cleared out. The staging consultant said, I own the house, I said, calmly. Barbara blinked. What? I opened the envelope on the table and handed her the printed copy of the trust. Nathan transferred ownership to me 2 years ago. It's in a trust with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. Elaine reached for the paper, squinting. This isn't right. You weren't even married 10 years. No, I said, only 8. But apparently they mattered. Barbara's mouth worked silently for a moment. That can't be legal. It is, I replied. Nathan was meticulous. Ask Thomas Whitaker, our lawyer. I slid the letter across the table, the one Thomas had drafted for exactly this moment. A cease and desist. It cited the trust, the deed, and Nathan's signed statement. It made it very clear that any attempts to harass or coerce me would be met with legal action. Barbara's face flushed red, then pale. So, what, you just throw us out? No, I said softly. You leave. You were never invited. Elaine sputtered, but I'd stopped listening. I walked to the stereo, selected one of Nathan's favorite records, a gentle jazz album, and dropped the needle. Then I turned back to them, still holding the envelope. I suggest you go before I call security. Or the press, whichever you'd prefer. Barbara opened her mouth, then closed it. Without another word, she stormed out the door, Elaine trailing behind her. I watched them go. And then I sat down in Nathan's chair, the music wrapping around me like armor. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. The day after Barbara's eviction from my kitchen, things began to move faster than I expected. At 8:00 a.m., Leslie arrived punctual as always, with a leather-bound folder under her arm and 2 cups of coffee in her hands. I figured you'd need caffeine, she said with a smile, handing one to me. We sat at the dining table, the same one Barbara had once declared she'd replace as soon as the house was properly sorted. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Leslie opened the folder and began laying out papers like a calm storm. Your husband had over a dozen design patents, Claire. Electrical components, mostly for infrastructure. He was quiet about it, but his ideas were solid. He licensed them to 3 different companies starting in 2016. I stared at the spreadsheets, the columns of numbers, the tidy list of payment schedules. You mean we had income from this? Leslie looked up. You still do. Monthly. Residual royalties. They've been deposited into a trust-controlled account. Nathan never touched them. I suspect he was saving it for you. My mouth went dry. Why didn't he tell me? Leslie's smile softened. Because he knew you'd tell Barbara. Or Wade. Or Elaine. Not out of foolishness, out of kindness. And kindness, Claire, is something he knew would be punished in that house. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. Also, she added, he named you as the successor on the licensing agreements. If any company wants to renegotiate terms, they come to you. It's all legal. All yours. That was when the bell rang. Donna, with her silver curls, oversized sunglasses, and a peach pie still steaming in her hands. Is it safe to come in? She asked, grinning. I brought weapons, sugar and friendship. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Donna had heard everything from the neighborhood grapevine, which in our suburb moved faster than a viral headline. By the time she set the pie down, she'd also brought updates. You should know, she said between bites, Barbara's called her sister in Michigan. Told her you've gone rogue and are squatting in the house. She said I'm squatting. I nearly choked. Donna rolled her eyes. Sweetheart, people like her can't imagine a world where they don't hold the deed. Leslie cleared her throat. Well, the deed says otherwise. Claire owns everything. Donna sat back and grinned like she'd just watched her team win the Super Bowl. Good. Because I've already sent your story to my niece. She's a columnist for a regional magazine. Human interest pieces, stories of injustice and redemption. She's been dying to find something juicy. I hesitated. You didn't use my name, right? Of course not. But if you ever want to share the full story, the door's open. Women need to hear this, Claire. Widows' daughters, even young wives who think love will protect them. They need to know that sometimes the law has to do the protecting instead. Leslie nodded slowly. I agree. Nathan protected you as best he could, but you're the one who stood your ground. You didn't just survive this. You outmaneuvered them. I looked down at the table, at the folder, the deeds, the trust, the royalty statements, the pie, at all the pieces of a life I'd been told I had no right to, and now held entirely in my hands. I think I said it's time I stop being afraid of what comes next. Leslie raised her coffee cup in salute. Then let's start with the business side. There are some contract renewals coming up next quarter, and if you want, I can walk you through them, Donna added. And after that, we'll plan your celebration dinner. No more sitting in silence while people plan to evict you from your own life. The three of us sat in my dining room, and began to make plans. For the company, for the estate, for my future. Barbara and Elaine had tried to erase me, but I had allies. I had power. I had the truth. And finally, I had a voice I wasn't afraid to use. 3 days later, the confrontation Barbara never expected came. Not in my kitchen, but in a place she couldn't control, the law office of Langston and Miles. Leslie scheduled the meeting. She insisted that it happen on neutral ground. Somewhere with walls thick enough to handle yelling and hearts strong enough to handle truth, she had joked. I wasn't laughing. Not that morning. I wore Nathan's favorite navy blue dress, the one he said made me look like I ran a Fortune 500 company. I stood in front of the mirror for a full 5 minutes before stepping out. Not because I doubted myself, but because for the first time I wanted to be seen as what I truly was. Not just a widow, not just a woman surviving grief, but a force no one saw coming. Barbara arrived first, with Elaine slinking in behind her. Elaine wore black again, mourning as fashion. Her platinum hair was perfectly coiffed, her lips pressed into a pout that tried to say grief but read entitlement. Barbara. She looked like she had walked into court expecting to win without lifting a finger. Claire, she said curtly, not bothering with a greeting. Let's get this over with. I simply nodded and took my seat. Leslie entered the room last, calm, composed, holding 2 thick manila folders. She took her place at the head of the table and opened with her signature surgical precision. I want to thank everyone for coming. Today's meeting will clarify the legal structure of Nathaniel Carmichael's estate. As Mr. Carmichael's wife of record and his designated successor on several financial matters, Claire requested this review to ensure that everyone understands the terms and boundaries involved. Barbara snorted. Boundaries? Claire's been living in delusion. This house, this estate, the business, it's all part of Nathan's family legacy. You can't rewrite bloodlines with paperwork. Leslie didn't flinch. Actually, you can. She opened the first folder and turned it so Barbara could read. Nathan established a trust, the Carmichael Foundation, 5 years ago. He named Claire as the sole beneficiary. This trust owns all existing patents, residual royalties, the family house, and the operational rights to Carmichael Electrical Engineering. None of it is part of the probated estate. Elaine leaned forward. But that means the will. The will covers his personal possessions. The car, the furniture, some collectibles. Claire inherits those too per the will. The business royalties and property titles are under the trust, separate and fully executed before Nathan's death. Barbara was silent for a full 5 seconds, the most silence she had managed in years. You're lying, she hissed. Leslie didn't blink. All documents were filed with the county clerk and notarized at the time of creation. Claire's name is on the deed. Claire's name is on the intellectual property. Claire's name is on the business. You're telling me my son left everything to her? No, I said, finally speaking. He left everything to someone he trusted. Barbara turned toward me, venom swirling in her stare. You little manipulator! You must have pressured him, I didn't have to. I interrupted, my voice steady. He knew what you were. He saw the way you treated me for years. Do you think he didn't notice how every family dinner turned into a tribunal? How you whispered in his ear about me being lazy or wasteful every time I left the room? Elaine scoffed. That house belonged to the Carmichaels. Our father built it. Your name shouldn't be on anything. No, Elaine. Your father built a structure. Nathan and I built a home. And that home is now mine. Barbara slammed her hands on the table. We're contesting this. There's no way Nathan would do something this outrageous without coercion. Leslie raised a second folder. We anticipated this, which is why your son recorded a video at the time the trust was executed. A video explaining his decisions in his own words. It's time-stamped, witnessed, and filed. Would you like to watch it? Barbara looked like she had bitten into glass. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Elaine paled. No, Barbara said finally. That won't be necessary. I thought not. Leslie began collecting the papers. Unless you have further legal concerns, I suggest you refrain from contacting Claire. Any attempt to threaten or defame her will be addressed through appropriate legal channels. Barbara stood, fists clenched. You may have won this round, but don't think for a second that you belong in our family. I rose calmly. Nathan didn't want me to, that's why he gave me everything. Elaine muttered something under her breath. Barbara stormed out without another word. The door clicked behind them like a judge's gavel sealing the verdict. I exhaled. Leslie looked at me with a knowing smile. You were brilliant. I was prepared, I replied, and I finally stopped asking to be allowed in a room I already owned. The day after the confrontation, I slept in. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up with a knot in my chest or the distant ache of loss pressing against my lungs. I lay in bed watching the soft morning light spill across the hardwood floors Nathan and I had chosen together, and for once, I didn't cry. The house was quiet, peaceful, mine. I wandered into the kitchen and made coffee strong dark the way Nathan liked it, and sat at the breakfast nook where we'd eaten 1,000 quiet meals. For years, that table had been a battlefield for glances, jabs, and silent judgment when Barbara came over. But now it felt like neutral ground again. I opened the envelope Leslie had given me the day before. It contained the finalized documents affirming my full ownership of Carmichael Electrical Engineering, the home deed, and the trust portfolio. My name was there, not just printed, but signed and sealed, holding the weight of a life I had once thought could be taken from me in a heartbeat. Nathan had made sure it couldn't be. In the weeks that followed, I began putting my life back together. Not as the wife of Nathan Carmichael, but as Claire Carmichael, independent and whole. I met with Tom Reyes, Nathan's former business partner, who was now serving as general manager. He walked me through the operations of the company, its ongoing government contracts, its promising green energy initiatives, its current financial position. I asked questions, I took notes, I made decisions. At first, the staff were cautious around me. They probably expected me to be ornamental, a placeholder widow with a signature but no spine. But by the second board meeting, I had already approved a research proposal, renegotiated a vendor contract, and signed off on new safety protocols. By the third, they were calling me Mrs. CEO. I didn't plan to stay in that role forever. Nathan had structured the company to run without him for years, and I intended to follow that model. But for now, it felt good to be needed, respected, heard. At home, things changed too. I redecorated, slowly, intentionally. I moved the antique Carmichael portrait from the foyer into the attic and replaced it with one of my own watercolor landscapes. I turned the guest room Barbara always claimed into an art studio. I painted the kitchen cabinets a cheerful sage green, something Nathan always said he wanted, but his mother had called too tacky. When I wasn't working, I was living. I took walks in the mornings and yoga classes in the afternoons. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, women who had slowly disappeared from my life as Barbara's presence became more dominant. They came over for wine, for laughter, for long conversations about who we used to be and who we could still become. One evening, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Claire, I don't expect you to read this. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. I let my mother control more than just our marriage. I let her control how I saw you, how I treated you. And in the end, I lost the one person who ever really believed in me. You were never the outsider. I was. You were the one who belonged. I hope someday you'll find peace. And maybe you'll remember that I did love you. I just didn't know how to fight for you. I'm sorry. Nathan. I read it once. Then again, I folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my journal, not to forget, but to remind myself of how far I'd come. That night, I lit a single candle in the living room and sat quietly listening to a jazz record we both loved. The grief was still there, quieter, but real. It lived in the corners of this house, in the memory of Nathan's laugh, in the way I sometimes reached for his hand on the other side of the bed. But it didn't own me anymore. I was no longer the woman sitting in silence at a dinner table, enduring insult after insult with clenched teeth. I was no longer the widow being told to pack her bags and disappear. I was Claire Carmichael. I owned the house, I ran the company, and I was just getting started. 2 weeks after Nathan's letter arrived, another envelope was slipped under my front door. This one was thinner, printed in a sterile font on pale beige stationery. The return address was a law office, the same firm Barbara used for her estate management. I didn't need to open it to guess what it said, but I did anyway. It was a formal notice. Barbara was contesting Nathan's trust and the ownership transfer of the house. The letter accused me of undue influence. It implied manipulation. It claimed Nathan's state of mind had been compromised during his final months. There were no signatures from Barbara, only her lawyers. But the threat was clear. She still believed this house, this legacy, this life was hers to claim. I read the letter twice, then tucked it back into the envelope. My heart was strangely calm. Later that afternoon, I drove to Leslie's office. She was expecting me. "You have nothing to worry about," she said firmly after reviewing the papers. Nathan dotted every I and crossed every T. The documents were drafted years before his illness. "Your name is on everything. His intentions are legally airtight." I figured as much, I said, sipping the chamomile tea she'd offered. But I want to do more than win. I want it to end. Leslie looked up. "How do you mean I don't want a court battle? I don't want headlines or gossip. I want peace." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "There's another way." The next morning I drafted a letter, not to Barbara's lawyers, but to Barbara herself. "Barbara, I received the legal notice. I won't argue with your grief or your anger, but I will not surrender what Nathan built with me. This house was our home. The company was our life's work. You may not have seen that, but I lived it. Nathan made choices in clarity, not confusion. He didn't choose against you. He chose for me. I will not engage in a court battle, but I'm willing to make peace. You once told me that nothing I did would ever be good enough for your son, but I was good enough, and he knew it. If you can accept that we can find a way forward." Claire. I sent the letter without expectation. It felt more like an act of closure than diplomacy. A week later, a reply came not from Barbara's lawyers, but from her directly. It was typed clipped and cold. "Claire, I won't pretend to approve of what Nathan did, but I see no point in dragging his name through court. I will withdraw the contest. I only ask one thing. Please do not speak publicly about our family. Barbara." It wasn't an apology. Not really, but it was an ending. And that was enough. That same day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay in the Carmichael house forever. It had been a battlefield, a sanctuary, a fortress. But it wasn't my future. I started looking at properties in the Pacific Northwest near the coast. Somewhere with trees, foggy mornings, and space to breathe. Somewhere Nathan had always dreamed of retiring. Somewhere we never got to. But I could. A month later, I stood on the porch of a craftsman-style house overlooking the rocky shoreline of Cannon Beach. It wasn't large 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a sunroom facing west, but it felt like freedom. I closed on the property with funds from the Carmichael Trust. Leslie handled the logistics. Tom Reyes, bless him, offered to handle the company in my absence until I settled in. I donated many of the old furnishings from the family home and kept only what mattered: Nathan's leather journal, the painting we bought in Spain, the stone owl he gave me on our third anniversary. I left behind Barbara's crystal stemware and every single antique vase she'd insisted I display. By early fall, I was living in my new home, waking to the sound of waves, drinking coffee by the fireplace, and painting in the afternoons. The company thrived from afar. I received updates, weekly profits, steady projects on time, team morale strong. Tom had become not just an ally, but a true friend. He respected Nathan's vision, and he respected me. On one especially crisp morning, I opened my email and found a message from a local women's group. They'd heard about my story, not the gossip, but the version I had chosen to share: a woman who rebuilt her life after loss, who stepped into power she never knew she had. They asked if I'd consider speaking at their fall retreat. Not about business, not about grief, but about courage. I thought for a moment, then replied, "Yes, let's call it Becoming Claire again." Fall came early on the Oregon coast. The air turned crisp in the mornings, and the waves crashed harder against the rocks below my home. My garden of coastal lavender and sage had started to fade, but I didn't mind. There was something beautiful about the stillness of things going dormant, like the earth taking a deep breath. It had been almost a year since Nathan's funeral. Almost a year since I was told to pack my bags and never come back. Almost a year since I sat in a lawyer's office and discovered that my late husband had spent years quietly ensuring my protection, my future. And in that year, I had transformed. Not into someone new, but into someone I had almost forgotten I was allowed to be. Claire. Not Mrs. Carmichael, not the accommodating wife, not the daughter-in-law who bit her tongue and nodded politely. Just Claire. A woman who ran a successful company. A woman who owned her home and her life. A woman who had survived betrayal, grief, and dismissal, and chose not just to recover, but to rise. The speaking event was held at a small retreat center nestled in the hills above Astoria. I had hesitated when they first asked. Public speaking had never been my strong suit, but the theme of the weekend, reclaiming ourselves, stayed with me. It felt like a message Nathan would have underlined in red ink, so I said yes. There were about 30 women in the audience, most in their 40s to 70s, some widowed, some divorced, some quietly fighting battles no one else knew about. The room smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. I stood behind the podium, cleared my throat, and began. I used to believe that quiet women were stronger, that endurance was the same as grace, that not speaking up was the same as being polite. But grace is not the same as invisibility, and silence is not strength when it means denying your worth. I lived for years in a house where I was never fully accepted. I married a man I loved deeply, and he loved me back. But even his love wasn't always enough to drown out the voices around me that said I didn't belong. When he died, they tried to take everything from me: the house, the business, my sense of identity. But what they didn't know was that he had quietly, deliberately built something that would outlast the noise. He built me a lifeboat, and when the storm came, I climbed into it. I spoke for 45 minutes. I told the story not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not as a revenge tale, but as a map. A path for other women to see that boundaries are not cruelty, that dignity is not arrogance, that protecting what you've built, especially from those closest to you, doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise. Afterward, 3 women came up to hug me. One whispered, "Your story is mine too. I just haven't left the house yet." On the drive home, I pulled over at a lookout point. The sea was wild that day, slate gray and furious. I rolled down the window and let the wind rush in, thinking about how far I'd come, about the people who had tried to erase me, and about the man who refused to let them. That night, as I stood on the deck with a glass of red wine in hand, I finally said it aloud. "Thank you, Nathan. Not just for the trust fund or the business, but for seeing me when others didn't, for loving me with action, not just words, for leaving me something stronger than an inheritance, a legacy, and the freedom to decide who I wanted to be." These days, I still get texts from Wade, polite, measured, sometimes awkward. I know he and Rami are trying to rebuild their lives. They still owe me money, and they're making their payments slow but steady. I don't respond to every message. I don't need to. Forgiveness doesn't mean return. And family, I've learned, is not just made by blood or marriage. It's made by loyalty, respect, and choice. Now I spend my mornings painting. I take walks along the cliffs. Sometimes I meet Tom for lunch when he passes through town. The company runs itself now. I'm still the owner, but I've let go of the daily weight. Because I've earned peace. I've earned quiet mornings. I've earned the right to sit on this porch and feel, for once, completely whole. To the women listening now, wherever you are, maybe in your own quiet war, maybe building your own lifeboat, I say this. You are not disposable. You are not weak for being kind. You are not wrong for expecting respect even from family. You are the storm in the shore, the one who builds, the one who stays, and when the time comes, the one who leaves. Take up space. Take back your name. And when they tell you the house was never yours, build another, better, and make damn sure your name's on the deed.